everyone, Ashley here, and I'm going to teach you how to hand sew a scrunchie. It's a really good first project, and we're going to learn two simple types of stitches. If you pick up a kit at New Lenox Library, you are going to get a pencil bag with everything in it. You'll have a fabric for a blue scrunchie, fabric for a cream colored scrunchie, a piece of felt with two types of hand sewing needles in it. Now we'll be using the small needle for today. The larger needle is typically for cross stitch or embroidery on a special cloth, but I thought I'd include that just in case you needed it. And I also wanted to include it in case anybody was having trouble with the tiny eye on the little needle. We'll also have little needle threaders that should help you thread your needle. I have my own scissors, so you'll have to supply your own scissors. You'll get a piece of elastic for each scrunchie, two safety pins. You really only need one, but why not? I got you a sewing person's favorite tool. Anybody who sews, actually, this is really important. It's called a seam ripper, and it's for when you mess up and you have to take your stitches back out. You'll also get blue thread and a cream colored thread to match your fabric. And you'll wonder why I have my card here. Now this is an older library card. It's not the blue one, it's the old burgundy one, but for a few reasons. One, it can replace an iron if you don't have access to an iron. And two, you can access Creative Bug or Craftsy on Hoopla with your New Lenox Library card, and they go into more in-depth classes on hand sewing, knitting, crocheting, just a ton of stuff. If you're interested in fiber arts and textiles, they got you covered. And it's not just textiles, it's baking and art and all sorts of stuff. So let's go ahead and we're going to get to sewing. So I'm going to work on the cream colored one today so that you can see it better. And I'm going to set this aside. The first thing that I'm going to do is take a piece of thread. This piece of thread you're going to want to be about 18 inches long. One sewing trick is, for an adult, it's about your hand to your elbow. So that's usually what I use. It doesn't have to be exact. So we're going to cut this here, and I'm going to take the little hand sewing needle. Now you might have heard that you lick your thread in order to put it through the eye of a needle. It is a trick I use sometimes, but what that actually does is make the end of your thread puffier. So if you do that and then you get it through the needle really quickly, that's fine. But if you keep struggling, you're going to have to keep snipping off pieces. So just don't let it get fuzzy on the end. Don't do the licking trick. If it gets a little bit fuzzy like it is right now, all you gotta do is take your scissors, trim the end off. You'll start with a nice fresh thin piece, and you kind of hold it, and there you go. I know I made it look easy, but it does take practice, and that's okay. That's why we make, is to have lots of practice getting better at stuff. To be a beginner, you're gonna be kind of bad at stuff. And I hate being bad at stuff. Oh, I hate being bad at stuff. But that's the only way that we get to learn new things. So I'm going to move the camera and I'm going to show you close up why your library card can be a good replacement for an iron. Okay, so if you don't have or you're not allowed to use an iron, usually you can use a card or your fingernail. So we're going to take this, flip this up, use our card, our fingernails. Probably even better if you've got acrylic nails. But for easy peasy, especially travel projects, something like this, you keep your card in the pouch, and you could take this on car trips, you could take it camping. Our summer learning challenge is fun in the outdoors and getting out in nature, and so you can have some nice projects. Now what we're going to do is, you see that there is a side that is mostly white, and then you see there's a side that has the print on it. So it's got all these books on it. Same thing with your blue. You've got a blue side and you've got the other side. So what this is with the right side, the print side is called the right side, and the side that the print isn't on is called the wrong side. So what we did was we folded these over, wrong sides together. That's called wrong sides together. Now what we're going to do is fold right sides together. And the reason why we folded these wrong sides together is because it's going to hide the edges for us when we put it together at the end. You'll just have to trust me for now. Now, usually what I would do would be to start sewing. We've got our cream color with our cream fabric, but I'm going to do the opposite today just so that you can see it better. So I'm going to use the dark blue just so that you can see it better. We actually want to use the similar colors when we're sewing our projects, just so that I measure it out here so that we don't see the stitches too much at the end, unless that's what you want to do. The fun thing about sewing is you get to pick your own projects, so you get to make what you want. Oop, this has a fuzzy end, so it's going to be hard to push through. Snip that off. Hold it out with just a little bit, like a quarter inch or a half inch. Push it through, pull out the other side. Okay. So you see how you can see that blue against the cream? That's why I'm going to use it to teach you, but I wouldn't do this in a normal project. I switched cameras so that we can get really close up and I can tell what I'm about to sew. Now, one thing about sewing is you can start your sewing a couple of different ways. You can put a knot in your thread, or you can do a bunch of back stitches. Now, since I mostly do oldie-timey sewing, I do a lot of historical stuff more than modern stuff, I'm just going to start with a back stitch instead of a knot, but I'm going to show you how to do all of those. You'll notice that I have a new piece of fabric. This is just going to be my teaching fabric, just a scrap piece of linen that I had so that I can teach you some basic stitching. We're going to go over 2 stitches, the running stitch and the back stitch, and what we'll use for our scrunchie is a combination of both of those. The running stitch is faster, which is really nice when you want to get done with a project. But back stitch is really strong. So I'm actually going to teach you a back stitch first because it's how I lock my stitch into my fabric. So I take a little bitty bite, I go down, make sure that you can see this, go down, and then back up just a little bit, just a little bitty stitch right there. Now go in, and I'm going to leave my thread like that. You see how I've got that tail? Sometimes I'll leave it way longer. You can leave it way longer, especially if you're a beginner, because you can just trim it at the end. Now I'm going to go back, that's why it's called a back stitch, back into my first little hole here. And I'm going to do that again. Back down and through. Oop, and you'll see that my little tail came with. That's okay. It does that sometimes. And I'm going to go back down and lift up. And I'll show you the bottom of this too. And I usually use 3 or 4 back stitches to anchor it in the beginning. See how nice and tough that is? If I tug on it, it's not coming loose. I'll show you from both sides now. If we go down to the back, what I'm doing is that I'm coming back up in the same spot. So that's to lock it in. Now to move forward with the back stitch so that you have a line of sewing, you can go down like that. And I'm pretty practiced, so I just kind of poke around until my needle comes up where I want it to be. But you can flip it over and look if you want. There's not a wrong way of doing that. So there it is. It's about the stitch size that I want. So I'm going to pull it up a little ways ahead, and then because it's a back stitch, where do I go? I go back. So I'm going to go back there to the stitch behind. Now to move forward again, I'm going to come up a few little threads ahead, pull it out, and sometimes it'll crinkle like this if you pull too hard, so you don't want to pull too hard, and you can always just kind of tug it and flatten it back out again. If you pull too hard, that's fine. Then we're going to go back. Doesn't have to be perfect, not unless you're very well practiced and you want it to be. Even in the days when they used to hand sew everything, people took a long time. And I'm kind of sewing on an angle here, but people took a long time to get really good at making their stitches look really good. And that's why usually when young people were learning how to sew, they would do all of the inside seams, and then somebody older and more practiced would do the ones that showed. And if you have any trouble, you can come into the library and see me. I don't work at the public desks, but you can ask for me. Or what you could really do, if you want to get a lot of help, what you could also do is come on Thursday nights, twice a month. There is Fiber Arts Club, and there are lots of very nice people in Fiber Arts Club. You can come and hang out and work on projects. Most people there knit or crochet, but we've had people who embroider and people who hand sew. And you just bring your projects and you sit around and you chat. So this is very calming. What I do is I'll take it on road trips sometimes, or I will take it when I'm waiting for something in offices, or if I'm waiting in the airport, or if I'm just watching TV. It's a nice quiet project for if you're just watching TV. So this is the stitch that I like the best, is back stitch, because it's the strongest one. But if you need to go fast, or if you're just being impatient, you can learn running stitch. And don't take big stitches if you're doing running stitch. You want to stay with smaller stitches because they're more secure. Smaller stitches are more secure than long stitches. And with running stitches, we go down. So we're going to go forward, down, and forward, up, and forward, down, and forward, up. I'm going to do that again. Forward, down. But since it's not going back on itself, it's not as secure as a backstitch. Now, my folded over thread is getting really close to the fabric, so I'm gonna tug this up a little bit so that I don't start accidentally sewing with 2 threads. So just up. Now I've done 6 running stitches. So what I want to do every 4, 5, 6 running stitches, since remember running stitches aren't as secure as back stitches, I want to put a back stitch in there. At least 1. Maybe I'll do 2. Maybe I just feel like doing 2. So we'll do 2. Those are our back stitches. We're going to go back into our running stitches. So down, up. See how I hold that nice and taut? If I don't want to go down and up and down and up, if that's a little too much, one of the slightly more advanced things that you can do is you can either hold it with sort of with 2 hands sometimes, but I like holding it with 2 fingers like this. Is you can I kind of hold things with my pinky sometimes too. Is you can go down, but you're not going to go down like this. You're just going to kind of dip your needle in, like you dip your toe in water, and then pull it up a little bit. You see how it's up like that? Do that again. So down a little, up a little, down a little, up a little. So here's where I sometimes switch to 2 hands. So I kind of brace my needle on the bottom there, and I kind of move the fabric more than the needle. That's just the way I do it. You'll probably find that there are different ways that are more comfortable for you. But you'll see here that we've got our running stitches on the needle, and we're going to pull it through. And look at that. It's a faster way of doing running stitch. And a faster way of doing back stitch is like I did at the very, very beginning, was to put it down like this and just come up a little forward. Do you see where my thumb is? How the needle is coming up a little forward. We'll pull that through. If you want to keep doing back stitch, down and lift up. And then you can keep going with running stitch. You can do all back stitch. It depends on, you know, how you like it, how secure you want your scrunchie to be. All right. So now I'm going to go back to my cream fabric here, but I'm going to get the dark blue thread. Again, just so that you can see it better on the camera. But if it was a real project, then I would use the cream thread. Okay, so I have my needle threaded, and I've got my edges folded over there, wrong sides together on the short sides. And now I'm going to fold it right sides together, long ways. And I want you to look at your fabric, and if you've got a cut edge that has some threads that come off kind of easy, that's great. If you have it on both sides, that's great. If you have one that looks a little bit thicker towards the edge, it's kind of tough to get your needle through. That's called a selvage edge. And what I want you to do is when you fold your fabric so that you can sew it, I want you to be looking at that selvage edge. I'm not sure if it's going to show up on camera very well, but there is a slight different color. You can kind of tell when you're looking at it. So I want you to be looking at the selvage edge when you're sewing, because it's hard to get your needle through that selvage edge. So you want to make sure you're sewing underneath it. It also gives you kind of a nice guide. So I'm going to start underneath it. Oh, that's just underneath it. Okay. Gonna go down. Gonna leave that little tail. Now I'm gonna just make a little back stitch. I'm gonna try. Alright, that's really strong. So now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna back stitch through this whole section, and then for the rest of it I'm going to make sure I'm under the selvage, and I'm going to do a combination of running stitch with a back stitch every once in a while, every inch and a half or so, just to make sure that it's still strong. Okay, so now I'm going to do down and up, down and up, like a little accordion, down and up. And then I'm going to do a couple more. Then I'm going to do my back stitch here, right here. And then I'm going to come back up right to where that back stitch ended there. And I'm going to do my running stitches. And then we'll just keep on trucking, and I'm going to go real fast through this next bit. And then you've got your edge up here, and the distance between your edge and the stitching or the seam is called the seam allowance. So this is kind of a skinny little seam allowance, but it's a scrunchie, so it's allowed to be. Sometimes in most patterns that you buy from the store, you'll get a 5/8 seam allowance. So that's a little bit over a ½ inch, but since it's our project and it's just a rectangle, we get to choose what our own seam allowance is. And the skinnier our seam allowance, the thicker our scrunchie is going to be. So if we start sewing down here, you're going to end up with kind of a skinny scrunchie, just so you're aware. I am getting a little kind of to the place where when I go in with my stitches, my thread is starting to get real close to falling off the needle. So what I'm going to do is, just like we started with our bunch of back stitches, I'm going to go ahead and do that right in place here. I'm just going to take 3 back stitches and pull it out and let that go. And you know what? I'm going to trim it. I don't even need to trim it that much because we're going to flip this inside out at the end. So I'm going to put it in my little bucket here. There it is. Grab some more thread. thread my needle again. And you might say, well, why, if we run out of thread so early, do we only measure that little bit of thread to start with? And it's so that it doesn't get super tangled. If you use a really long piece of thread, it's going to get really tangled and knotted up, and you will not have a fun time. I did give you a couple of sewing pins, or safety pins, sorry. So if you don't have pins at home, but you need to keep that fabric lined up, just throw those safety pins on there, because we don't need the safety pins right now. We need them for our elastic later, but that'll also hold it in place, okay? So you can do that. All right, now I'm going to get back to stitching some big old running stitches with some back stitches tucked in there. All right, so I have done my running and back stitch, you know. And I am near the end, so I will show you how. I'll finish up just the way that I start, which is just with more back stitches. I know some people like to knot it, but I like to keep it as simple as I can. So I usually do this at least 3 times, more if I'm feeling like it needs it. And sometimes I'll go from the other direction. And we made it just nice and even away from the edge and just under that selvage there. So I'll do one more up. Now I'm just gonna trim this. Now what we're gonna do is take these safety pins out. I only need one now. I'm going to take one of my elastics. I'm going to actually bend this, and I'm going to fold it over at the end. Because if you just put it in the end, sometimes it pops out, but if you fold it over, it'll be nice and secure. So what you want to do is either end, you can pick where you started or where you ended. We're going to sew. Just, you see how I'm keeping it away from the other edge. I am just going to backstitch that into place. I know it's a little hard to see because it's dark blue on the black elastic, but you want to do it a bunch of times. I'm going to do like, I don't know, at least 4, maybe 6 times. Just stab up and down. Alright, that seems pretty good. I'm going to trim this. I'm going to set my needle aside. So now I've got one side is sewn to the scrunchie and the other side has a safety pin on it. We are going to tuck that safety pin in the middle. And we're going to go ahead and follow it up. So you're going to kind of scrunch it around the safety pin. And then you're going to feel it for the top of your safety pin. Hold that tight. You're going to pull that down. So now you're going to scrunch it around that safety pin. hold it tight while you pull the rest of it back, and it's going to start getting wrinkly because we're going to start flipping it inside out soon. Wrinkle, wrinkle, wrinkle. Pull down. Oh, this is the scrunchy part of the scrunchie. Pull down. I think we can do, there it is. So now at this end, this is going to take a little bit of doing, but I'm going to start pulling it. On this side, we're going to flip this. And this is when I get a butter knife, or I encase my seam ripper and I start using it too. So this is one of the slightly more difficult parts, but you can do it. And if you really feel like you can't do it, somebody can help you. Sometimes it takes a bit of patience, but see, I want to show you too right here why I chose the blue to show you and make sure that you know. You can see the thread. But for normal, regular, everyday projects that I don't do for a demonstration, I would match the fabric, because you see how the stitches, they're showing up on the outside a little bit. So that's why you want to use thread that matches your fabric, because otherwise it'll show. Okay. So when I use a butter knife, I don't use this part. I use the other end. Push up through there. And now, so it's up. Got a grip on this edge here. And if you just push, it'll start going through. Go back down, find that safety pin is right there. So I'm going to push until I can find the top of that. Alright, and then you can just kind of tug down. And sometimes you gotta pull top because it gets really kind of clumpy at the top. So push that way. I'm going to use my butter knife again. So I'm going to pull this out, pull on the safety pin. So just hold the edge if you can. Oh, and there you go. So it takes some doing, but you'll be all right. Now, we flip that. Now this goes back in, but we're not going to flip it back out again. What we're going to do is we're just going to make the scrunchy part. So we're just going to do the scrunch. Scrunch, scrunch, scrunch. Oh, and I left my air conditioning unit running. Hold on, let me... Sorry about that. I got too enthusiastic about recording again. Sorry about all that noise. Alright, scrunching. Now it looks like a scrunchie. There is this part. Hooray! So what I would do now is undo your safety pin and keep it through the fabric like that. Now take your thread, and I would do more back stitches. So I'm gonna pull this out, pull on the safety pin. So just hold the edge if you can. Oh, and there you go. So it takes some doing, but you'll be all right. Now we flip that. Now this goes back in, but we're not gonna flip it back out again. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna make the scrunchy part. So we're just gonna do the scrunch. Scrunch, scrunch, scrunch. Oh, and I left my air conditioning unit running. Hold on, let me. Sorry about that. I got too enthusiastic about recording again. Sorry about all that noise. Alright, scrunching. Now it looks like a scrunchie. There is this part. Hooray! So what I would do now is undo your safety pin and keep it through the fabric like that. Now take your thread, and I would do more back stitches. Now I'm going to teach you how to do a knot. Some of you may have learned to do knots. I find them a little fussy, but they're good to know how to do. So I'll teach you here. So we're going to start by wrapping once, twice, and then pushing our fingers so that it twists off, and there's the knot right there. But sometimes if you're sewing things, that knot becomes kind of a lump where you don't want it to be, and it can be kind of irritating. But you know what? It's scrunchy, so it'll be fine. So, but I do want to hide that knot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the inside. You're going to kind of see inside out. So that knot's going to hold it in there. So I can take the safety pin out because it's going to get kind of in the way. And I'm going to take that. See, it's a little bit lumpy. I'm going to try to flatten it out. Stitch back and forth. Again, this is partly why we use matching thread, because that's going to be a big blue lump. I'm going to only stitch that a couple times. I'm going to take this. This is one side and the other. You're going to kind of put one in the middle of the other one. You can do, you want to match up your stitching lines. So you see how we've got stitching lines here, stitching line here. We want to match that up. There are different ways. I want to tuck that in pretty good. So what I'm going to do is get back up really close, go back under here, and I'm going to do what's called a whip stitch. So I'm going to take a little bite of the one below and a little bite of the one on top and stitch them together. If you're right-handed, I think it's easier to go from top to bottom. If you're left-handed, you'll probably do it this way and go from top to bottom with it flipped like this. That might be a little bit easier. And I'm just gonna go all the way around. And because it's my scrunchie and it's nobody else's scrunchie, I'm not gonna be too precious about it. But again, you can go all the way through. That might be a little hard because there are a lot of layers of fabric. So this is why, that's why I'm doing this whip stitch. And again, I would be doing it with the matching thread. That's why it looks kind of silly. That's okay. I'm going to do that all the way around. I'm getting close to the end of my thread, so I'm going to do a few stitches all together. I'm going to go kind of under here, kind of hide my thread, because I'm going to snip it like this. And so this is a pair of embroidery scissors, and it makes sure that you don't snip anything underneath. It's nice. Okay. I'm going to actually I'm going to finish this up with the cream color thread so that you can see the difference that the correct colored thread can make. And if you have any questions, remember you can put that in the comments. You can email me at info@newlenoxlibrary.org. And you can come visit me at the library. But I don't work at, this is why I leave the tails on. You see how if I don't leave that long tail on, it'll pop out. All right. I don't work at a public desk, so you'll have to ask if I'm there. I'm usually there. Let's see. See how you can almost just not even see the stitches? Now that they're with the correct color thread, I'm going to tuck that guy down in there with my needle. So see how when you're using that same color, it can get kind of messy and you don't really know. That's why it's nice. See? I can barely tell I've stitched anything. Oh my goodness. And we're coming back around. Now let's do our big ol' multiple back stitches. I'm just gonna kind of go sideways through here. Trim this up. And look at that. This is my scrunchie. Wristband scrunchie. Hairband scrunchie, whatever you like. If you want a scrunchie that is thicker, then I would recommend you can pick out your own fabric. These are about 21-22 inches long, these fabric pieces, and about 3-ish inches wide, but you can make them really chunky if you want. because that would be beautiful. You can make them out of velvet. Velvet gets really fuzzy and gets everywhere, but they make beautiful scrunchies. So there's our scrunchie, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed your basic sewing lessons today. We learned running stitch, whip stitch, back stitch, pinning, and how to turn things inside out, how to start and finish. So great job, and we hope to see you at the library very soon. Bye.